Representative Newman. Oh, excuse me, Representative Burr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If somebody could explain exactly what change was made, because I did look at the last amendment after I looked at the first amendment to the bill, and I think this is the third, hopefully the last, but you know, I just want to know so I don't end up being like Nancy Pelosi.
Representative Pearson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just in response to your question, the one change is found at the bottom of page 4.
So page 4.
Yeah, if you're looking at section 3 and determining whether there is, and this is the change. As you saw the amendment before, it said in determining whether there is probable cause. This change is in determining whether there is clear and convincing evidence. And again, I'd say, and I recognize that that is a higher standard.
Representative Welch. No, excuse me, Representative Newman, then Representative Welch.
Yeah, I went through, I spent the past couple of days comparing the First Amendment to the bill. And then I compared and went through that, and they did, the changes I saw in the amendment were meant to address the concerns that the ACLU testimony had. And in this bill, I believe we have that one change, so.
Representative Welch.
Yes, on page 9, line 12, is it? Well, yes, line 12. At this point in the process, the individual has been reported as NICS. This is the system that would be sort of do a NICS check when you buy a firearm. If once he's reported to NICS, there is no provision here to take that name off. So he loses his firearms for the rest of his life.
It's a one-way ticket.
One-way ticket. And that's what, we really need to spend some time on this bill.
Representative Walz. Further discussion? Is there any further question on Representative Young?
Real quick, I was under the impression that it's unequally applied to the poor because there's no funding to pay to get their guns back for storage fees or whatever. That's one thing. And I see that they corrected something about having to have evidence. I also thought from the hearing that it was said that once they get the phone call or the knowledge that someone is in this position, that they can just go confiscate the guns, whether the person they're worried about lives with that person or not. You know, like, but I just don't like the bill. So I think it needs a lot more work.
Representative Pearson and Representative Chester.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to speak to the merits of the bill in general. I've spoken a little bit about what these amendments do, and I want to first start off by saying I know I'm a substitute on this committee, so I wasn't here for the public hearing, and I recognize that might detract from what I'm about to say, but I hope you do recognize that I try to study these constitutional issues, specifically due process, and that seems to be where a lot of the challenges to this bill would be. When we're talking about the Second Amendment, or any amendment for that instance, we need to recognize that while the Constitution is a sacred document and it bestows extreme caution and scrutiny to legislatures who wish to enact legislation around those amendments, we need to understand that it's not all-encompassing. There are time, place, and manner restrictions on our First Amendment right to speak. It's nowhere in the Constitution that a probable cause should be the standard for a search warrant. That is indeed what we as a community have all accepted to be the standard for police forces to search my property. That's a huge violation of my constitutional freedoms of privacy, and we've all agreed that probable cause is a sufficient standard for that freedom to be violated. So when we're talking about the Second Amendment, it seems to be there's my way or the highway. You can't touch the Second Amendment at all. That is just not how the Constitution should be read. There are reasonable, common sense gun legislation that we can enact, and that's what I campaigned on. That's what my constituents want, and that's why I'm going to be voting in favor of this bill. Due process, as it's been defined and generally accepted by our federal courts requires an unbiased tribunal. I think this bill allows for that. Notice of the proposed action and the grounds asserted for it. This bill does provide for that. Even though there's an ex parte component for it, you'll notice that there's a 3-day window with which they can request, demand even, a hearing. Due process also requires the opportunity to present reasons for the proposed action not to be taken. I would assert that that would take place during that hearing. Fourth, it requires the right to present evidence, including the right to call witnesses. Again, this is all performed in front of a neutral and independent magistrate, which is another one of those requirements of due process. 5, the right to know the opposing evidence. Again, this would occur during that hearing. The right to cross-examine adverse witnesses. Again. 8, the opportunity to be represented by counsel. I think that is allowed here. Again, these hearings are going to be taking place in front of the Superior Court. 9, the tribunal is to prepare findings of fact and of the evidence presented. And those are 9 and 10, and those again are codified in this statute. So I think federal due process concerns are met with this bill. And again, I would suggest to members voting on this that the Second Amendment, there is reasonable legislation that can be enacted on the Second Amendment, and indeed all of our constitutional freedoms. The question isn't whether it can or cannot be enacted; it's whether or not it complies with federal due process requirements, be they procedural or substantive. And I think this does.
Representative Testament, then Representative Swinburne.
Let me ask a question of the representative. So a person can have the police at their front door who tell them they're going to seize their firearms. And you say, hold off, we got to have a real hearing. Is that true? Is that what this bill says?
Representative here.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So that is true. The firearms would be seized, but the hearing would occur within 3 days of that request.
Could follow up.
Follow-up question, yes.
Good. So, and as I look at the back, of how you would get your firearms back, that could take a long time and a lot of money. Now that to me is not a fair situation. If you want to say, hold on, yeah, let's go talk to a judge, don't seize my firearms, that might be one thing, but not when you just go in and wholesale take my firearms.
If I may?
Yeah.
Croc TV.